walk into a house, you think, wow, this is gorgeous, I can fix it. And then actually it could be some of the fixing that you do that winds up poisoning your kids.
I think what's really a concern here is he dealing with ADHD as a result of lead poisoning, or is that something he would have had all along? I don't know, and that's the frustration.
The first trouble we started seeing with Curtis was when he couldn't speak. He was very delayed.
I was constantly feeling horrible because I felt like I'm not normal at all. I cannot fit in. I was constantly depressed.
It'll be a reminder for the rest of my life that we poisoned our daughter.
We need to understand the Centers for Disease Control estimates that here in Indiana we have about 13,000 children that are lead poisoned, already have lead in their system or are at risk of that.
Well, it's a real problem especially in a major metropolitan city such as Indianapolis, because we have about 25% of our homes were built before 1978, and so they have a lot of lead paint inside their homes. So it continues to be a problem, especially for families who have children under the age of 6, where they're the most impacted by lead poisoning.
Neurologically, the first 6 years of life are very important. The brain becomes organized. The neurons connect in a way that helps the brain make sense of the outside world. What happens when children are exposed to lead is that lead prevents that organization from occurring. It actually causes the brain to be more disorganized, and those effects are lifelong.
My now 11-year-old son has lead poisoning, and I found out that he was lead poisoned when he was 1. What's interesting is I would not have necessarily known to have had him tested had I not been working where I work. I didn't know about lead poisoning. I found out about the age of 1 that he was lead poisoned after a pediatrician did not test him at my request because he said he didn't need to be tested. So I persisted a little bit and found out that he did indeed have a lead level initially of 21 micrograms per deciliter. So if you think about 10 micrograms per deciliter being the threshold in which a child is considered elevated, he was just about double that.
We moved in and we're in the process of making some of the changes. My wife took our then 1-year-old son Silas to the Elkhart Health Department, and they said while he was getting his 1-year shots, hey, we happen to have a free lead test. Would you like to do that? And my wife said, sure. Well, he failed the test, which came as a complete shock to us. They said, well, wash his hands clearly, keep an eye on what he's eating, and come back in a couple months. We did. He failed again. As we started to do some corrections, then our then again 1-year-old Silas started getting worse, because obviously you're disturbing much of what would otherwise be the lead. It turned out that much of the porches were in horrid condition in terms of lead. They were more than 10 times what should be the normal limit for any kind of lead paint. All the nights that you're awake staring at the lead poisoned ceiling, thinking that the house is sort of there to attack you because all 3 of your kids have some level of lead poisoning, and now you face the question pretty much all the time of, are they behaving that way because of the lead poisoning, or is it really that they're just being kids? And now you have to, you'll never know the correct answer on that one.
What I think is particularly sad for me about this situation is that was the 3rd house I'd worked on and had been aware of lead paint issues in houses of that age for 15 years when I got there. It's not as though I didn't have a sense for the potential dangers in the house. But I'd gone through that in each of the other houses and tested them, and the levels weren't high, and had the kids tested, and so it was one of those, had dealt with the dangers and they didn't feel very real to me. She had a little bit of a learning disability in 1st grade, and that's one of the potential. Lots of kids have little learning disabilities, but sometimes lead causes little learning disabilities, and we just felt awful. We just felt we may have caused this.
My husband brought home a high-intensity heat gun, and I would sit there and I would put that heat gun on the paint, which would allow it to bubble, and I could chip it away. What I didn't know was there was lead in the paint. What I didn't know was that there was an air conditioning vent right underneath it that sucked those particles through the filter system of the HVAC system that dispersed those dust particles all over my house. And my baby boy, from 9 months to 18 months old, every time the furnace or the air conditioner would kick on, he would inhale and ingest lead particles that you couldn't even see. He started getting sick, just odd sick, where he was never well. I was very angry. And the guilt that I felt and I carried for years was one of the most unbearable things. It was my fault, flat out. I did this to him.
It's demolition and remodeling, because you vaporize, you get a lot of dust, and it's directly ingestible, which is likely what happened with us.
In 2009, the Indiana State Department of Health passed a rule that said that paint retailers have to train their clerks to provide sound advice, and then also to supply certain supplies so that the normal do-it-yourselfer can do work in a safe manner. In Indiana, because there is a state rule, it doesn't matter where you go to get advice on lead-based paint. You should be getting the same kind of safe advice. Whether you go to your local hardware store or you go to a big box store, it still should be good, sound, safe advice.
The first step is always get your paint tested, always. If you're bringing a painter in, you can insist that they use lead-safe practices. And if they don't know what that means, you ought to consider looking for another painter. Put some responsibility on your contractors. They should know what they're doing.
1978, when they finally said enough's enough, we should never have this problem again. It's 2010, and we're still, every day, a child gets sick. It doesn't have to happen.